Good evening. I wanted to tell you a couple of stories today. Let's start by telling you the first half of the first story. First story begins with me looking for a burger because I'm got a little hangry, as we would say. I hadn't had a burger in a while, and I was really craving one. I go to a burger joint, and when I get there, I get in line, and in this line there are two people. There's a woman in front, and then there's a soldier behind her. The woman in front is going to town on the cashier there, and couldn't have been 18. He was young, really did not have a lot of experience dealing with people. It was obvious in his face who were mean-spirited and angry about what I would consider petty shit. She was raging about them being unable to get her burger as fast as she would like it. Their grill had had some technical issues, but they said it would be back up and reasonably within a few minutes. She would just stick with it, and they'd be fine, and they'd get their food. And she was not hearing it. She was not interested in reasons. It's just she felt as if it was appropriate to treat this person behind a counter because they are behind a counter. That somehow that entitled her to really deliver some angst. It would be considered sociopathic because you wouldn't talk to somebody like that you never met, hopefully. I mean, if you do that, you've got some other problems to deal with, homie. Maybe burgers and social situations in general shouldn't be your forte. Behind her was a soldier. Now, I happen to know this soldier, and this is important. I'll give you a little background history. So I'm going to stop the first half of this story. I'm going to tell you another story about this soldier that I do know. So this guy, I remember, he wanted to really experience life. He had been, I would say, sheltered a lot of it. Slightly even, I would argue, in an abusive sort of family structure. And he broke away from it one day. And it took a while for him to really embrace variation in life and try to understand people. And he didn't, because he wasn't as educated as he wanted to be. Not socially, anyway. It's not a matter of necessarily book information. It's more social structures. He just did not have as much exposure as someone his age rightfully should have. So he didn't know how to act, a lot of it. And it took him a long time to really grasp what people meant by what they said, because context was lost. But also the greater aspects of exposure to life that other kids had by his age, had already passed through those gates, and he was fresh learning, and he really wanted to embrace all of life. And so he would talk about how much that meant to him to go really grab life as much as he could, experience as much as he could. So it became an experience based sort of series of adventures, and it was good for him for a long time. Eventually, he graduated high school, and he was inevitably enticed by the idea of going to the military. So he said, I had done this, and I've heard things like the gas chamber was supposed to be a big deal, and it really wasn't as big of a deal once he went through it, because he did go into the military, and he went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, which it's an okay place. It's dry a lot of the time, and he would say it was mostly dry until he did his week in the wilderness, which then it was raining the entire time. But it was sort of the irony of it. He got to suffer through it and experience people from all over the world. But it was a good time even through basic training, because basic training, as they would say, is the time you love and hate the most, right? And then he would go on to his school, which was a 45 Bravo, and that is in the Army, it's a small weapons repairman, which makes effectively the MOS for an armorer. So for that, he ended up going to his training for to be a 45 Bravo in, say, Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland. And he and one other soldier were graduating sooner than the other ones. The other ones kept falling behind, which kind of left it in an off space. So there's only really two left that are kind of too far ahead of the other soldiers, and not far enough to be in the next class up, and that is graduating earlier. So they're kind of in a limbo. But they even did their last class that way when they were the only two that passed that course. And that soldier, though, he and the other soldier graduated, but that soldier got to go home. The soldier we're talking about right now, he got papers, orders, specifically to go overseas into a desert area, into a situation which I won't list or talk about much detail. A lot of this he just considers his private business. So one thing though was he wanted it. He wanted to experience this too. He'd never been out of country. He'd never done that, and this is like, this is just even more. Got to experience it. Need to experience it. Need to understand it. And he gets to know soldiers from over there, and they've been there a lot longer than he had. You know, they're telling him all sorts of stories about their lives and whatnot. And he gets to experience life by proxy, as we would say, through the eyes of others. Inevitably, while he is an armorer, it's pretty much a low-key area. Not a lot going on. Nothing happening, except when it did. When there was an attack on the base that he was at, and there were shots fired, and it was a back and forth exchange. He hit the floor, like if you're fresh out of basic, you learn to hit the floor early. Hopefully you learned it, and a lot of the soldiers that are professional soldiers, straight up professional soldiers, are hitting the floor. But some of them kind of lost it, and so they stood there kind of shocked, didn't do what they were supposed to. But it's sort of a thing where you think about humans in this way. They, you can train them all you want, but in the situation, like an emergency, do they react that way? Do they react the way that you've trained them? It really depends, and until you're in that situation, you really don't know. But that soldier, he dived down and heard bullets over his head. But he had watched two soldiers who didn't quite hit the floor quick enough get shot, one through the head and the other through the neck. One through the head pretty much went down, and there was a pull, as expected. It was very much like a movie in that regard, as he would describe it, if you could ever get him to describe it. The other thing that stuck with that soldier, that one was pretty brutal. It was the one through the neck. An unbelievable amount of blood came out, and he had never seen this before in his life, but he got to see it. Not a movie, not an act, in person. The deal about movies of desensitizing, we know it's not real, and we don't get that shock factor involved in somebody getting actually shot, and in watching it firsthand and knowing that person is in their life is in jeopardy at that moment. And what stuck with it was the sheer amount. And that soldier couldn't forget how much physically would come out of that neck. Just unbelievable. And it took its toll on him from that point on. He was shook up. I didn't know how to really talk to anybody about it, and so he never did. Inevitably, he served his tour in this context will mean 6 months. And he came back home. And he would be in the Army Reserves at that point. And he went to his unit, which is the 271st. And he wouldn't talk to the other soldiers about it. He was still a private at that time. He didn't want to discuss anything with any of the soldiers who had been overseas at any point in their life. Didn't know what he'd even say because he didn't want to talk about what he saw. And if you could ever get him to ever tell the story, it'd be a cold day in hell almost. He never really talked about it with his family. Never really talked about it with a lot of his close friends. But he got to that point where, after a while, he just never wanted to admit to even being in the army, which and it killed a lot of his, as I would say, his need to travel to understand the world. That time forward, it kind of tainted it, which is too bad, because the spirit initially was to know all, to experience all. And that sort of thing does kind of put a crimper on one's psychology. At any rate, this soldier, after having been to basic training for a couple of months, and then to his training for his armorer for nearly 4 months, and then his time overseas, he hadn't had like good old-fashioned American food in quite a while, and he too was hungry at that moment, at that place, in that line. And now we will rejoin the second half of the first story. So we'll unfreeze them. Don't worry, they didn't go anywhere. This woman is still going off and demanding to see a manager, as if the very act of calling a manager would somehow give her more power. And what are you seeking to do when you do that? And in the end, you have to wonder, how good is your life when the worst thing that happens to you is a burger not coming out exactly when you want it? I mean, we in America, we have food on demand, on order. If you got the money, it's stat, buddy, and most of us have the money. We have a very high income in terms of like, if you want to compare worldwide, we do well on a world scale. And so having food available all the time, that's a big deal. Food production takes a lot of time that you would spend trying to produce food, and gives you that time back so you could do other things productively in the world or on your own time. You go to some place in the world where they don't even have that convenience, where every day you work to find out what you're going to eat that day. You have to work so you can eat that day. And most of your time that day is dedicated to, how you'll even take care of yourself. And the biggest gripe she has is, it's not out now. Stat. The soldier who is behind her was, he was rather livid with that situation. And he gave her a look. And I didn't have to see the look necessarily. But I know what he was thinking. He didn't have to say the words, but I knew exactly what he was thinking, just with the stare he gave her. And what he was saying in his head was clear as day. Bitch, get some fucking perspective. Again, I didn't have to hear him say it. I saw the look in his face. I saw it in the mirror. Thank you for joining me.